So, have you guys heard the one about the old man that went for a walk and found a talking frog? Do you know it? Do you know it? It's okay if you know it. It's okay if you don't. I'm not going to tell it, but I will come back and explain why I mentioned it. So thank you for that introduction. I've been working in brand strategy for almost 25 years, and I've been working mostly volunteering with startups for 6 or 7. So I have a lot of ideas, a lot of things I could talk about, and I have 10 minutes. So I had to give it some time, some thinking time, to distill down to what's most important. And that's actually one of the biggest points I want to share with you. Branding is a lot of things, but one thing that I want you to think about that I think is lacking often in the startup space is that branding is about figuring out that which is most important and not talking about all the things, but talking about the most meaningful things. So with that, I have just a few things I want to talk to you about and 3 main principles, more or less. First, I want to talk a little bit more about branding because it's often misunderstood. What I want to tell you about branding is that brands, especially from your perspective, if you're a founder, if you're a brand owner, are incredibly complex. There's so many product details and facts and story and history and experience people have with the brand and their perception and various communications. Think of it as an overstuffed briefcase. There's a lot of things inside the briefcase. That's the brand. Branding is what does the outside of the briefcase need to look at for people to hold it and understand it? And what I like most about this metaphor is that a briefcase has a handle. And you want to think about having a handle, and you want to think about the outside of the briefcase, and try not to think about all of the insides of the briefcase. That's the process of distillation that I want to talk to you about. So the handle, great, that's okay. The handle is an attention-getting device. And what I mean by attention-getting device is, have you ever seen a talk where people start with a joke, like maybe a story about a talking frog? If you take a public speaking class, you're often told to start with an attention-getting device. And just as that's true for public speaking, it struck me a long time ago that that's true for brands, that you have to think about what's that thing that you use to grab people. And we tend to think about all the things that we can say. We tend to think about the insides of the briefcase. And I think we've all sat through pitches where people are saying all the things they can think of because I know all these things, and someone might have a question or an objection or a concern, and so I'm just going to keep talking and I'm going to say them all. Those are typically, while very information-packed, perhaps not fascinating to receive. An attention-getting device, like your little joke, says to people, what's happening next? That's interesting. Now I'm listening. And so I want you to think about your attention-getting device. I have a lot of metaphors for this. I was thinking about, as I drove over, the tip of the spear. You know, what's the pointy part of the spear, and then what comes next and next, and the thrust that's behind that spear. How are you going to get in with your story? Because if you turn the spear sideways, long ways, here, I'll do it with this. If you come at people like this, that's a defensive move. That, the spear, is an offensive move, and that's how I would like you to think about your marketing. Okay, your branding. Okay, so how do you do that? So if the first principle is attention-getting device, have an attention-getting device, I would also say that that is usually, not always, but usually your brand's name. There's lots of different strategies that you can use for naming. A name can be very descriptive and kind of prosaic. It can be very evocative and poetic. And depending on your strategy, you know, one or the other one is not more valid than the other, except in how it aligns with your strategy. But always, that name should grab attention, preferably. And if it's not a name that grabs attention, God damn it, what are you doing next to grab attention, right? What is the tip of your spear? So having said that, the attention-getting device, what comes next? That's the second principle I want to share with you. And that's the idea of laying a trail of breadcrumbs. So again, we've all seen these presentations that are a little bit verbaria, you know, coming at you with a lot. But the best presentations The best branding in both cases are where there's a trail of breadcrumbs, breadcrumb, 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 to lead you into the forest, to take attention and then pull the attention along and not just squander it. So, there's no rules in branding or in any of these communications, and yet there are maybe a couple things I've learned that you could consider for a framework. And so the thing I would say is that you should focus very much on what you offer and why it matters to people. And in the trail of breadcrumbs, it comes later to talk about things like how you deliver it or who you are that makes you the best to deliver it. These are very important and valid things to share, but perhaps not right all at once. Those things can come later. So a side note on elevator pitches, because in this context, elevator pitches are so important. We know that they're supposed to be very, very short, and yet I have almost never seen one that wasn't too long. So thinking about this idea of frameworks, that there are no rules, but here's a potential shortcut, a framework. Think about, for your first breadcrumb, as you're talking about your brand, as you're thinking about how you'll articulate your brand, think about this formula, your name, which is hopefully an attention-getting device, a name that disrupts, catches attention. Then, a generic descriptor, a 2 to 5 word statement of what your brand is. We have all sat through pitches where at the end of them, we're still wondering, what is on offer here? What do they do? And so there's a lot of magic in having a 2 to 5 word descriptor. If you think about, for example, Tide. Brian McCleary's sitting there, so I thought of Tide. Tide is not named Tide. Tide is named Tide laundry detergent. 2-word descriptor that tells you what it is. For the love of God, come up with a 2 to 5 word descriptor of what you do and use that immediately after your name, and that's your second breadcrumb. That brings people in. And then the third part of this is you probably want a tagline to articulate what it is that people get when they get what you offer. And so I have an example that I think will make this make more sense. Imagine about 20 years ago, the launch of a new company, and they said, we're PayPal, an online payments system that creates a safer, easier way to pay. We're PayPal. That's an attention-getting device. It's a pretty good name. PayPal. I think I know more or less what they're doing. It's kind of cute. It's got the 2 Ps. I want to hear more. I'm leaning in when I hear that name. Great. An online payment system, just 3 words, but I kind of know what it is. You can imagine that the people behind that brand had a lot of technical savvy and were able to talk about how can we make payments online safely. Well, it's with this technical giga doohickey, clearly I don't know how to talk those talks, but they surely did. And this is all the years of experience we have. No, that comes later. Online payment system, great. But then the emotional payoff creates a safer, easier way to pay. Why should I care? Start there, and then the rest of the breadcrumbs flow more easily, logically, and with people hanging on the edge of their seat to hear about it. Yeah? So the third principle that I wanted to share with you is to always make things easier for your audience. And that seems like a truism. Well, sure. But making things easier for your audience is almost always quite difficult for you. Many founders in technological spaces are coming with this great expertise, like no doubt the PayPal founders did, where they speak a different language. And in these contexts, they feel like it's important to speak that different language to show their expertise. And so what I would exhort you to do is to cut that shit out. Speak in plain English. And only when the breadcrumbs are at the place where it's necessary to establish your expertise or your credibility do you lean on that expertise. First, you have to be human, and you have to be crystal clear. Doing that, making things easier for your audience, that is harder for you typically. because it means making yourself vulnerable to run things by a ton of people and to take on board what they tell you if they tell you that it's not clear. It's to have enough confidence in your expertise to shed the trappings of your expertise and to simply show up at that deep meaning level. I was very taken by Nathan's comments when he talked about the founder's insanity. I think that we see so many founders that have this insanity and they think they need to bury it into their credibility, under their credibility, but it's the opposite completely. Pull that out, find the way, make yourself vulnerable in that way, and that's how you will inspire. And so I'll close with a quote from that brilliant genius of many things, not typically branding, Albert Einstein. He said, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. That's what I've learned is the most important thing about branding and about branding in the startup context that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.